and the duration of the assets and liabilities. And when the 30-year bond changed way out there, it crushed them. That's every single financial problem throughout history. From tulip bulbs in the Netherlands to 2008 in mortgage-backed securities, every time that's what happens. And it usually happens after a period when the Fed or something keeps things unnaturally away from markets. And people stretch for yield. And it's happening right now in America. So I've always thought we do a day here, and we do a day in Portland, Maine, a day in Burlington. I'm here for the day. I'm just going around visiting people and so forth. And I hope to last long enough to be in the very late Rhode Island primary. But he's got some questions. But that's why I'm running. And I have the answers to this stuff, and I've spent 20 years not working, studying this stuff. And the people who know me know that I know the answers to this. So we got to get it in front of the people of America. And I got to break out somehow. And I am breaking out. We're moving along. I was on Newsmax this week. A lot of good things happening. And now I want to answer a lot of questions from you. I'm sorry, Michael.
That's all right.
But that's why I'm here. Because I've got these 6 kids. And my kids are going to be fine. You can meet them here. There's 3 of them here. They're college sophomores. One of them's 15. So you can meet the fact that I homeschool kids. And this is the result. But we got to change this country so our kids, so your kids, Jenna, can all have the same future. Because right now they got nothing.
We've got a bunch of questions rolling in from the audience. I know we have some media will ask some questions, but I'm going to take prerogative and ask you the first one. So we got a lot to get through.
Okay,
You already answered my first one about SVB Bank and the economy. Let's go to foreign policy. Tucker Carlson asked all the major candidates what they feel about the national interest in Ukraine and in Ukraine is and non-candidate, but they didn't ask you. So here's your chance. What is the national interest in Ukraine? What should we be doing or not doing there?
Yes, and I was very surprised by some of the answers. Again, the governor of Florida, I guess, was told to appeal to a certain amount of people in the Republican Party who think Ukraine is not important. Ukraine is vitally important. It's been important in geopolitical terms since Ivan the Terrible in the 1500s. Since the Cossacks signed a treaty in 1654 with Russia. It's been a separate country, wanted to be a separate country full of separate people, and geographically one of the most important areas in the world. By the way, one of the weakest ones because it's very flat. So the problem has always been this, and you can watch Dr. Zhivago and watch some of this, right, the movie. But Russia always wants to take this land because they've had a history of people from the Cossacks coming toward Moscow. World War I, World War II, and they've been able to stop them because by the time they get near Moscow, winter comes and people die. So they've always wanted to go in the other direction. We can't allow it. And here's the thing I want to convince you all of one thing. What people say in the campaign trail and what they know, what people say in the campaign trail and what they actually do as president, anybody who becomes president will take the same view. Trump will say whatever, he's going to settle it in 24 hours. Anybody can settle something in 24 hours. Remember, he was going to settle North Korea in 24 hours. He had 3 meetings with the guy, nothing got settled. Communists don't settle things. They just keep moving forward. But the vital interest of ours in Ukraine, which right now, so far, none of our soldiers have died, right? We've used equipment, stuff we weren't going to use against China. China's a war battle. And if they have Ukraine again, it is much more likely that they move to Poland and Romania. Those are the 2 other countries that they really want. Moldova, of course, is a little country. But it's much more likely that they keep moving because that's what Russia does. What we've been able to do, I'm not a favor of the Biden administration. I think they handled it all wrong from the beginning because we don't win wars, right? But what we've been able to do is point out, even to the Germans, that Russia's no longer a superpower. The Germans have always liked to pretend that we can't do that because Russia will do this. We can't do that. And now that's gone. So now is the time for the president to increase NATO spending and demand it, not 3%, minimum of 5%. When people are in wars, when we were in wars, we went to 10% of GDP on national defense. That's what should be happening over there, and that's what the president needs to do. But it's critically important that Russia loses, or we're going to have them on the border of Poland, and you're gonna see a much more likely situation that the nuclear weapons are used, much more likely than today. By the way, people say, what's gonna happen to Putin? Again, go through history. How was Khrushchev removed? About a year, they waited a year and a half after the Cuban Missile Crisis, gone. How was Nicholas II removed? Very quickly after World War I, right? So we don't need to worry about regime change at all. The Russians have a way of taking care of it throughout the history. They will take care of it. Whether it's better or worse afterwards, I don't know. But I do know that Ukraine is of critical importance in a matter for concern for all of us today to avoid our soldiers fighting in a war in Europe.
This question comes from Steve from our audience. Fundraising. Some people say you need $1 billion to run a presidential campaign. What's your campaign account look like, and how are you going to compete financially?
Well, this job is way too big to even talk about how much money you need to raise now. What has to happen is what happened to Peter Buttigieg or Herman Cain or whatever. I can't call enough people. Many people in the audience have donated. But when you're running a renegade can at the beginning, money is not the most important thing, and no one really should worry about it. I think everybody here should go to stevelaffey.com and do something, right? And I appreciate it. But that'll be a national thing with $25, $50, $100, when and if I break through to a point where people really give money. But it doesn't take a bit. Folks, listen, campaigns are vastly different. And I will tell you this one thing that I probably shouldn't tell you. So much money is wasted on TV ads that nobody watches anymore. So much stuff from the old days is gone. It's just gone. First, I'm going to need a lot of free media. Then I'm going to need some donations. And then when, for example, I would just tell you this. It's so good that I'm not in the morning consult poll. Right? People say, what do you mean? It's so good they haven't asked about me. I mean, Nikki Haley announced at 7%, 2 weeks later she's at 4%. That ain't me. Mr. Vinnick, I can't say his last name, very bright young man, basically says nothing as he talks, but very bright man, Yale lawyer guy. I mean, he said, I don't even know what he says when he's done 5 minutes later. But he started at 2, he's 0. Well, folks, you can't be lower than 0. So one day, in the next 4 or 5 months, you might see me at 1. If I'm at 1, I'm gonna be at 3. If I'm at 3, I'm gonna be at 7. So, listen, at Morgan Keegan, what I did, we found growth stocks. You wouldn't judge me by where I stand today. Where are we going to be in 6 months? But once we do that, money will come. A great deal of money will come. That's what happens in campaigns nowadays. Not when I was running for mayor, escaping to run for the Senate, going out for lunch to, where was I going first? Anyway, I went to someone's office and I called people outside Cranston for money, and I had to do it because I had to raise money. This is a vastly different type of campaign. And I became friends, by the way, with Herman Cain. And he told me what to do. And that's why I'm using also the 999 plan, because I liked it then. I loved Herman Cain, God rest his soul, he's passed away. And that's what's going to happen with money. It's going to have to be a national thing where this guy Laffey, he has the answers and money starts pouring in, and I won't waste it. One thing you know about me, I don't waste money. I did a fundraiser, I raised $102,000 at the Roads in the Patuxent one day. I spent $2 grand, gave everybody a $15 bullhorn. Everybody was happy, right, Jimmy? Anyway, you still have the bullhorn.
All right, we're going to alternate with the media. Anyone from the media want to pose a question? Go ahead, Pat.
I just spent some quality time with our congressman and your congressman, David Cicilline, and the question revolves around price controls and market interference by the government. They were touting the new $35 insulin payment. My question was, is there any fear that, as we all know, price controls create product shortages? So is there any fear that government involvement in free markets will end up hurting the very people that they purport to save? What are your thoughts on big medicine, government controls, government involvement?
If it's just about, well, first of all, you're right. Price controls. Anybody remember, Mr. Stenhouse, remember the odd number, even number license plate stuff in the 70s, right? The whip inflation. That's the stupidest thing of all time, right? I think people realize that's so stupid in those type of markets, they don't go back to it. But in healthcare, yes. I mean, we need a market. But the problem is, in healthcare, there's a number of problems. One, who's the biggest lobbyist in Washington? Pharmaceutical companies. How much did they spend last year lobbying? $300 million. Doubles everybody else. So why do they get what they want? They're down there lobbying these people. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. But the number one thing has to happen is that this stuff has to be not made in China. Folks, so we live in a nation of talking, right? So in 2020, Tom Cotton, another nice man, who's a U.S. Senator, he was all over bringing back prescription drugs and the ingredients in prescription drugs out of China. Does everyone remember seeing him over and over and over and over saying the same thing? No one did anything about it. They went on to another topic. So we have to insource this stuff with China, or we're going to have a day in the next 5 years where people here in this room don't get their prescriptions filled. They don't get them. So I'm not directly answering your question about, but price controls are bad, but when it comes to healthcare, and when it comes to prescription drugs, I've always said this, like, why are you people in this room, why do we allow, we pay twice as much per drug as anybody in Europe? Why does Pfizer sell at half a price to the Germans? Because we let them. If we could either get our drugs in the free market shipped in from Germany, or if you want to have a price control, we're not paying any more than Germans. Like, right? So we don't have to be the cash cow for Pfizer and Merck and so forth. There's a lot more problems, and I could go on about this in healthcare, because I know a lot about healthcare. My daughter has stage 4 cancer for 8.5 years, and I've seen over $5 million of bills, which I didn't pay because I have insurance, cross my desk. I realize how these insurance companies have totally tried to hose people. Maybe you realize it too. And a lot of that has to change. By the way, one of the sickest things I've ever seen in my life, and this is not against personally David Cicilline, but really? Leaving Congress for a $650,000 a year job plus? Really? Is that really a nonprofit, folks? It seems to be, these nonprofits in hospitals, by the way, are nonprofits, many, they seem to be extraordinarily profitable for the people who run them. It's sick. No nonprofit should be paying people more than 80 grand. Really, that's why they'd be a nonprofit. They're supposed to be helping people. But they don't. They just take the money.
Let's go back to the audience. Michelle asks, we wrote up, did a movie Fixing America, how are you gonna fix the borders and the fentanyl crisis?
That's a tough one. Fentanyl, made by China, coming through Mexico, killed 100,000 U.S. citizens last year. The numbers are like, when you say a growth industry, killing U.S. citizens with fentanyl is the biggest growth industry in America, it looks like. And by the way, my understanding, and again, I don't drink, I don't smoke, never had any of this stuff myself, my kids don't do it. People are actually taking pills that look like prescription pills and dying. Now it's being made by Mexican cartels who seemingly are putting things out in, instead of nanograms, putting them out in grams, which are killing people. So it's a multi-step problem, but the biggest problem is Mexico. I've been, as you all maybe know this back when I was mayor, but I actually went across the border, not like looking at the border waving for an hour. I went across the border, right, into Altar, Mexico, and watched a scene that still haunts me. The whole town of Altar, Mexico is nothing but Chrysler minivans that are really old. And people get off. I saw a pregnant lady was get off with a kid. I was with a Catholic priest, and she was starting to walk. She had no money to get a coyote to take across the border. Pregnant lady, 30 miles south of the border, just starting to walk toward the border. This is horrific. I saw an Asian girl unprotected in a car, and I mean, there's a lot of women here, but we knew what was going to happen to her at the border that night. It happens every night. She was an unprotected individual. I was told by Dr. Robin Hoover to look down and don't look up, and I didn't, because people with machine guns were driving this way. I watched Mexican policemen give out little handouts to people saying, you know, here's how you get across the border. Not stopping them, right? So the whole relationship with Mexico has to change. We are blessed in America. We don't know what it's like to live in Ukraine, right? They're every bit a human being as we are, right? But we live with the best geography in the world. 2 giant oceans, basically our cousins to the north, right? I mean, kind of like, you know, pretty close. And then we have this Mexican problem, which can be solved if we make Mexico stop it. I don't like to say things that we can't do, like send our army to take out these people ourselves, but someone has to work on Mexico more than, in addition to building a wall, in addition to not letting people come across, in addition to, by the way, here's the one thing we never do. When was the last time you saw a CEO of any company be arrested for hiring illegal aliens and thrown in jail? My Justice Department, I'll give you this one promise. I've never said this before, but I'll say it to you now. We will never settle a white-collar crime case. J.P. Morgan, if I'm president, will never settle 35% of their pre-tax profits from 2010 to 2015. They settle as if, yeah, we'll just give you 200 million, U.S. government, but don't touch Jamie Dimon. We're going to put people in jail. We take a white-collar criminal case to court, and Glucksman runs it for me. We're never settling it. And then, believe me, a lot of this stuff would stop. People in America arrested, hiring illegal aliens, jail, 6 years. Things change. People don't like to go to jail. But we never do that. We go after the illegal alien, we never go after the employer. We never talk about Mexican government, which is totally out of control. Like you think you're gonna send more stuff in a truck across the border? No. We'll collapse their economy if we have to, because we've got to stop this stuff, finally, once and for all. You know, for years, the Republicans wanted cheap labor, and they were fine with everything. And Democrats just wanted, by the way, they thought wrongly that Hispanic people who came to our country would be Democrats. I used to say to myself, wait a second, I'm down across the border. These guys go to church, they're working their butt off. They sound to me like Republicans. I used to say this on the radio shows back in, and you know what? It looks like back in the south part of Texas, it looks like that's happening. People fleeing the Democratic Party, they were never really in it. They're like, what do you do? I don't want to get into all the progressive stuff. They're like, I don't do that. I go to church on Sunday. I go to right? So they're not with. So the Democrats never realized this about Hispanic people. And not all Hispanic people and this and that, but people coming across the border generally become Republicans over time. You know? Anyway, so keep going. I'm sorry.
All right, back to the media. First question is from Pat Ford from Coalition Radio. Name your name and your organization if you have a question.
Hi, I'm Ann Clanton, Rhode-IslandNewsToday.com.
Hi.
Nice to see you back in the States.
Yeah, good to be here.
So, as a lot of people know, I've been a long time Republican and everything, and I'm very concerned. I don't see the party that I knew, the Bushes and so forth. What are you going to do to bring the party a little bit back to the middle so it would be more inclusive, and people don't feel like they are not wanted within the party?
I don't know about bringing the party back to the middle or being inclusive and stuff like that. I think of myself as a very inclusive person, but I'm about ideas and policy. And I think the Republican Party has to unite over somebody who has the right policies for the right time. You know, when I won the mayorship of Cranston, which I was not supposed to win, right? And I tell this one story where we did a poll of 500 people. Polls this in 2 people knew who I was. This is May of 2002. One person really liked me, and one person somewhat liked me. So it's very political in Rhode Island, very political in Cranston. They'd be like, Mr. Laffey, how's the polls going? How's the polls going, Steve? Oh, I said, very well. We have very low negatives. It was the only thing I could think of that wasn't a bald-faced lie when we won the race. So my point is this. If you go to stevelaffey.com, I'm the only candidate who wants to really fix and strengthen and modernize Social Security. In a program that, if you're 48 years old, could you get less? Yes. If you're already retired, you're going to get what you get. If you're 20, are you going to get 5 times more in 40 years? Yes. So the thought process that we can't tell people the truth is what I do. I don't have people know, I don't have a bone to like say everything's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. When I talk about the Fed, Federal Reserve, and the Republican policy should be the Fed only does money and keeps it at 0. Where did they get off saying 2% was price stability? Did that sound okay? Like when they say things 1,000 times, people in this room generally don't say, well, yeah, price stability. That means no inflation. It means the same cost. Do you know what they say at the Federal Reserve, by the way? They try to tell you that if prices went down, the world would end. Deflation's the worst thing they ever thought of. The biggest growth of the United States of America was the 1880s, where we had nothing but prices going down. The biggest growth, real growth, the greatest increase in income in the United States history is the 1880s. So what they try to tell you is something that is so stupid. Like, okay, so you go out and buy a new car, you're looking at a $46,000 car, and your wife says, you know, honey, next year it's going to be $45,500. We better not get it today. No, you need a car. Right? So the whole thing that's been said to the American people for so long is stupid. And so I'm not trying to include everybody who doesn't want to join. I'd like to think I am, if this is my administration. I hire the best people. They could be all white, they could be all black, they could be all Chinese. I don't really care. No, everybody knows I don't care at all. So it's not about that. It's about how can we stop this erosion of the middle class that's been destroyed mostly by the Fed and by Washington, and get young people to have a future where they actually care. That's what I'm about, and that's what my policy is all about. If you went to stevelaffey.com and look at the 5 policies, it's a cycle of death. The public schools, the Fed, China, communist China, not just China, communist China, right? I'm old enough to know my dad would call it free China, and communist China, he would say this, right? And it's about these issues that are on my website, the corruption in Washington. That's why I chose these 5 that no one else is gonna talk about. Because if I catch on, it's because people finally say, you know what, that guy's right. What the heck are we doing with this Federal Reserve talking about unemployment? That's the job of Congress. The Fed's supposed to handle money, and keep inflation at 0. So remember this one thing about the Fed. Inflation's probably going away pretty soon. But they don't give you the money back. If you're making 60 grand, you had $4,000 increase alone in energy cost in Rhode Island, you don't get the money back, just so you know. They just took it, they gave it to rich people who had bought silver or some commodity, right? And you never get it back. That's what the Fed does. That's what we have to stop.
Let's keep with the party unity theme. Before I get to you, John, from Anthony in the audience, how are you going to handle on the campaign trail or on a debate stage Donald Trump?
Oh, that would be a good problem, right? I mean, it's always a good problem if you have to handle Donald Trump, right? I'm not really running against Donald Trump or any one person. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not part of the never Trump crowd. I like the judges. I thought it was I say all these things, you can play the tapes. It was a brilliant marketing thing in the campaign of 2016 that he was going to appoint these judges. Evangelicals, Catholics, Christians said, okay, I can live with that. Pro-life, I can live with that. And he did, by the way, he did that. I always said about Donald Trump that he doesn't have an ideology. He's a marketing genius, but not someone, like the stuff I'm saying to you right now, if you've known me all my life, you probably heard me say this in 2002. Not in a campaign, because I was talking about city issues, right? But you heard me say in 2005. I've been saying the same thing. So it would be a really great problem to be having the battle with Donald Trump. I just don't know what he's going to say about me. He'd make him a nickname. I don't have time, right? But unlike, by the way, I always
How about Mayor Steve?
Mayor Steve. But I don't really have time for this. And so, listen, Donald Trump does the best he can with what he's been given, and it's just not working anymore. Now, it's going to work versus these other people. The other people have a big problem. Everybody running that you know of that it's about to run worked for Donald Trump, supported Donald Trump. The governor of Florida supported him. He supported him, Nikki Haley, the whole gang. I'm the only one who can break through that has none of these problems. I was asked to speak for Donald Trump twice in Colorado. And you guys know me, I say yes to every Republican thing. Everything Mike wants to do, I say yes, yes, yes. I said no twice. And both times people were taken aback. One to speak as if I were him and debate the governor, Governor Hickenlooper, and one to do a rally. I said, listen, I would then be telling my children one day that I did this for some short-term gain, that I'd be in the news one day. I don't need to be in the news ever again. And I'm perfectly happy. I don't believe it that he's going to follow through on a lot of these things. And, listen, Donald Trump, how can any Republican, I know there's probably Trump people here, but that means you've ignored $8 trillion of debt. You ignored the $8 trillion. Remember how we were after Obama for $8 trillion of debt, but that took 8 years? Trump did it in 4 years. He wanted more of those negative interest rates, price controls. He wanted negative interest rates. This is bizarro world. It's destroyed the country financially to the point where this is going to get much, much worse. Especially if Janet Yellen keeps telling you from the Treasury everything's okay. That's the worst thing you ever want to hear, right? Everything's fine? You know it's not fine, right? How about just the other day, big banks put in $30 billion to help stabilize one bank? Really? Do you know how there's $19 trillion of assets in banks? I know billion and trillion. What are they talking about? There is not enough money. How about this guy Vinnick? He wants to go to $10 million in FDIC insurance for every individual, every person. That's insane. There's nowhere near enough money in the FDIC insurance to cover the 250, right? But remember what the Fed did. I hate to always get back to the Fed. Remember what the Fed did. The Fed gave you the greatest bone. They raised the the FDIC insurance on October 13th of 2008 from $125 a person to $250. How many people, you have to raise your, how many people have $250,000 in any one bank in your own account? Really? I could drive from here to the Pacific Coast and not meet someone like that. They took away all your interest, 3% on cash, that the normal person said, oh, I'd saved a lot of money, I got 40 grand, I'm gonna buy a home. 0, 13 years. And they gave it to rich people. Really? Everybody's okay with that? I'm not. I wasn't then, I'm not now. That has to change. I'm sorry, John Howard.
Mayor, you've had a chance to drive around today and understand your itinerary really takes you mostly Cranston and Warwick. Coming back, what do you see? What do you see Rhode Island doing, and how would you rate what's happening here?
I don't, John Howell asked me, I've driven around Rhode Island, I don't come back as often as I'd like to, and how does Cranston, Warwick, or the state look from my view? It looks terrible. The roads are in terrible shape. I can't believe driving down none of this happens in Colorado. Like, I'm sorry, this is a dying industrial state. It's the most wonderful people. I miss everybody greatly. The place is falling apart still. Politically, I mean, the whole thing has never changed. I mean, in Providence, what happened to Federal Hill? I'm not going there to eat dinner tonight. The whole thing, the graffiti everywhere. You might remember as mayor, I got rid of the graffiti, right? Yep. You know, I spent time, like, we had cops sitting in bushes. We arrested people. I don't like graffiti, you know? You might remember I picked up all the signs, every day I had a guy pick up all the signs that said, we buy your homes or whatever, right? They didn't put it down anymore. I had a truck drive around and just pick them up. I did the Fight Blight program. I took down the flags and put up new flags, right? I just don't see it, John. And I feel terrible saying it because, you know, this is my home. This is where I was born, all right? It just looks terrible. It just physically, it's old. And physically, and because, as I said many times, because property taxes are 4 times higher here than where I live. The carrying cost for people who are older is too high. It's like the guy who ran for president saying the rent's too damn high. The property taxes force older people to sell their home. They force people not to paint their home because they don't have the money. You know, we're not a right-to-work state. I tried to talk about being a right-to-work state, and you know, because I looked at a map and said, wow, you want a Toyota manufacturing place for cars? Be the only right-to-work state anywhere within 500 miles. No one wanted to do it. That would bring manufacturing jobs. No one wanted to do it. Mayor Cicilline wanted to put like condos on the deepest, closest to England port. The one that made America at the turn of the 1900s the richest place in the world. The richest place in the world was Newport in Providence, Rhode Island in 1900. It was the industrial capital, and it was humming. And since the Great Depression, it's going down. And it hasn't stopped. I hate to even talk about it anymore because it truly bothers me to see it.
All right, this one from Anonymous from the audience. You mentioned, you mentioned education, one of your top 5 issues. As president, we've got declining achievement across the country. We've got controversies over divisive curricula and parental rights. What would you do about that, and what is the proper role of the Federal Department of Education?
Well, the proper role of the Federal Department of Education is no role. But look at what happens. You elect a Republican who says that, and they point someone to be the head of the Department of Education. They wander around because they're school choice friendly, and nothing changes. I want to be very blunt about this because I don't know if I have the most amount of kids in the room, but I have 6 kids. I have personally educated the last 3 by homeschooling them when my other daughter, Sarah Grace Laffey, came down with stage 4 neuroblastoma. I stopped my life, I did it, I love it. They're here, by the way. Why don't you stand up for a second? These are... Audrey Laffey, and that's Jessica Laffey. In the middle is Stephen Patrick Laffey Jr. And the reason I have a junior is that the older kids were old enough to stop the vote. I wasn't going to have a junior, you know? And you have a Dave, right? So it was a younger one. So anyway, Peter said, let's have a Stephen Laffey Jr. So we do. So you guys can sit down. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to stand up. But I had to homeschool them when my daughter went away. I became radicalized against the public school system of America, not while I was mayor. I sent my kids to public school here because I always was still in that mentality, like I got the bumps and bruises and hanging out, and doing stuff in the playground. And after I got out, my wife says to me, well, I said, what do you want to do? My book's coming out in 07, and she said she'd like to go to Ireland for a couple of months. So I said, I'll take the kids out of school, I'll grab some books. This is Sam and Sarah for the most part. And they were 5th and 6th grade, and they knew nothing, and I was ashamed. I was ashamed of myself. I was so busy being mayor, I saw them with some books and so forth. I never sent them back. And I've educated kids in Montessori school, LaSalle. Peter went to LaSalle when I had custody of them, private schools, homeschool, Veritas homeschool. And I'm just going to tell you right now that the public schools in the United States of America cannot be fixed. They need to be ended over a long period of time. We need to get every parent a check and get every kid out. There are parents like me until 2007 who somehow think that Little House on the Prairie is like still going on, right? The rerun show from the 1800s and 1900s. Or they missed the last 15 years of PTA meetings, but they just really never happened. The ones that happened when I was a kid, when Mrs. Stenhouse was a librarian and would be in the room, right? And Miss Walsh took your job, my favorite teacher, I know that. These were very different meetings. You could remember Mr. Hayes someone saying, I want new drapes over here, and the principal's writing stuff down like you actually care. That's gone. It's over. It will never change, and all we're doing is locking young children into the beginning of the cycle of death. And you've seen these kids. They're not kids, they're 30. They can't make change. You give them a $100 bill. They're looking at it like they've never seen one, number one, and they don't have they're just staring there, and they don't know how to make change. You have to tell them how much to give you.
Yeah.
This is the failure, and it's not going to change. So what we need to do is have a program. By the way, I'll tell you one last thing. How do you know the federal government really couldn't care less about education? Here's how you know. We have a thing called the internet. We have wonderfully great teachers. Someone in the United States of America is the best Algebra 1 teacher in the world. Why is he not online for free, teaching every segment of Algebra 1 with videos and so forth? So if your kid missed it, you could go to that website and watch it. Free. But anyway, so here's the other thing about property taxes. The average person in Providence, I'm just going to make up the number, but I'm not going to be too far wrong, is like $23,000 a kid. I could do it at my house for $2,000, and everybody can do it at their home. Veritas does it for $4,500. The Catholic schools can do it for $8,000. You could go on all day long about who could do it. In the margins, when you're a financial guy, you look for margins. We can drive a truck through these margins. Your property taxes should go down by 50%, and then Rhode Island could compete again, just by getting kids out of the public schools. There was a time and a place for all of this. It ended in like 1976, and it slowly went away, and it's never coming back. And if we don't change it, and I mean now, there's a kid in Detroit who's Steve Laffey. He's a Mike Stenhouse. He can go to Harvard. He's not going. They didn't put him in 7A. They didn't do it. They put him in with a bunch of kids who caused problems. The kids made fun of him on the way home, and he's out dealing drugs. That's what's going on. He's not going to Harvard. It has to change, but nobody running for president will tell you this. What do the good Republican governors tell you? Stop the wokeness. Again, let's stop the wokeness. I get it. That's about 3% of the problem. Now let's give the schools some more money so they can, whatever, make sure they have the right books. I don't know. Go look at any budget about textbooks. Go over to Cranston East, and I bet you dollars to dozen, John. Go ask for the textbooks of math, get a copy of Catcher in the Rye, get something, and take a look at the missing pages and the doodles in them. And then find out what percentage in Warwick, Rhode Island they spent on textbooks for kids last year. Not that you can't get it online. It's near zero. It's on my website. I say it bluntly. I've got the most kids. I've been the most educated. I've taught the most than anybody running for president, kids and adults at URI. It needs to end, and it needs to end now.
Steve, question.
Yeah.
Are you advocating that parents stay home to educate their children like you did?
If they can, I am, but not everybody can. So they can go to Catholic school. They can go to they can get a check and send them to Veritas, which is where my kids went after I was done doing. Go somewhere. Go anywhere.
Charge?
I am advocating that if people could do it, homeschooling, it's great. And more people are, by the way. It's a fast-growing industry, about twice the population. Homeschooling's growing. But not everybody can.
And rather than work, they're gonna stay home, educate their children, and not go to work?
If they can, yes.
Well, not everyone is
No,
in the
not
same
everybody, no.
financial situation that you
But
were,
no, but
obviously.
I just said, Tom, then they can send them to Catholic school, to private school, to you name it, Steve Laffey's school. There'd be a host of schools started if this was this was going on over a 10-year period. No, not everybody can do what I do. I get it, and not everybody has the background to teach like me. I get it, but there's a host of things. But the check should go to the parent, and they should make a decision. Is anybody in this room think it could be any worse? Could it be any worse? It could be half the price and be just as worse, and your property taxes would go down. But it can't be worse, can it? It's the most horrible thing to see. Kids who can't read, kids pushed along. So Tom, anything is better. The internet is free. We got the greatest teachers teaching people after they get out of work at 16. They can work all day and still go to high school and watch videos. I mean, it would be better than what's going on. Go find, by the way, here's another thing to go find if you want, John. Go find who teaches Algebra 2 at Parkford Junior High School and see if they majored in math. They didn't. They used to. Miss Burns did. She had a master's in math and math. They don't anymore. You think I forgot anything? I know all this stuff, right? I can name every one of my teachers because it was so important to me. But they don't major in math. They get a math teaching certificate. They majored in sociology. It's terrible. It has to stop. This is why I'm running. This cycle of death has to be arrested, or in 2 years, this country breaks apart. We won't survive this one unless we get our act together. Go ahead.
All right, remember, if you'd like to submit a question, info@oceanstatecurrent.com. This is from Gita. We all know now that the lockdowns and the mandates from the last pandemic, under what circumstances would you consider such actions in the future?
Never. That I can see, I clearly stated when they started these lockdowns that if I was president of the United States, the message from Donald Trump, it would cost him the election, and it did, among other things. The message to America was that everybody goes to work. I said, I have a special situation with my daughter's cancer, but you know what? This is my problem. It's not your problem. It's not the federal government's problem. It's my problem. If you really have a health problem, you got to take care of it. If you have really old parents, because that particular situation affected overweight people, people with prior, Herman Cain, my friend, died. He had cancer. He didn't have an immune system. He caught it. He died. So I get it. But look at what Sweden did. I mean, you can go through country by country and say, people in Kansas were shutting stuff down. Nobody lives in Kansas. Like, really? Who are you going to catch it from? I don't mean to joke, but Rhode Island obviously went way overboard, right? Mask, double mask. By the way, let me just ask this one question. If masks actually had worked, everybody's been to the emergency room at Rhode Island Hospital at some point in their life. Did they have any masks in 1979? No. Did people coughing everywhere, right? You're like, oh my gosh. Why didn't they use them? Because they didn't work. Because the molecule is much smaller than the mask, unless you have a really N99 mask, I guess. Yeah. Which I happen to have a lot because I have hay in the barn, and I just put on these masks when I throw hay around. Which is hard enough for people here to imagine, but that's what I guess. See, a guy who grows up next to a gas station is not throwing some hay around, right? So, but this is all foolishness, and what it leads to is just simply control. And by the way, it led to what? All the overspending that caused the inflation that hurt you. I mean, when I talk about corruption, not to get off on this topic, but the PPP program is $800 billion. That went to friends of J.P. Morgan. Tom Brady got $1 million. He needed $1 million, huh? Like, I need a hole in the head. I mean, think of what happened. Think of how they have 70,000 cases of fraud. They got 12 people working on it? Really? I mean, This was unbelievable in the history of the United States of America that we went ahead and did this stuff. In my humble opinion, we should not have done it. And people, some people would have died, maybe more people would have died. But you know what? We stopped the whole economy of the greatest economy in the world? Really? Like, come on. And then we sent checks to people. So here's what they did. They sent you $1,400 worth of checks, not you personally, not you probably, but they sent you but they cost $4,000 of increased cost for you every year. So they took away 8 and sent you 1,400. Everybody's okay with that? I'm not. Donald Trump was perfectly fine with it. In fact, he wanted, by the way. So if you're a Donald Trump fan, you got to say this. You got to say I'm totally okay with Donald Trump saying I want even more and bigger checks to go out, forcing 2 Republicans in Georgia running in a special runoff to be forced with the worst decision of all time. If I say I agree with Donald Trump, Steve Laffey won't vote for me. If I say I don't agree with Donald Trump, the Donald Trump fanatic won't vote for me. They both lost. The Senate changed hands. All because of that one statement, that he wanted bigger checks, more negative interest rates. I can't wait for him to attack me.
Before we go back to the media, I understand that theme. A question from Andy. Look, I think it's apparent health officials, government officials, pharmaceutical officials, CDC, FDA, NIH, all deceive the American public.
Yes.
There's some congressional hearings going on, but does there need to be more? Do we need a special commission to look at wrongdoing and perhaps criminality when it came to all these COVID lockdowns and mandates?
I guess I'm really not into commissions. I'm not really into commissions that keep looking backwards, that go on for years. I'm just into looking forward. It'd be better if the President of the United States, whoever was president, just got up and said, we're not going to do that again, rest assured. And I would say, for example, that if someone told me I was getting a, by the way, I didn't care whether people got vaccine shots, didn't people make their own choices, right? But they weren't vaccines. Wouldn't it be better for Joe Biden to say today, you know what, I want half the money back, Pfizer. I'm not really that mad. You told me it was a vaccine. Vaccine I understood is that if I took the vaccine shot, I don't get it. That wasn't true. Maybe you made a mistake. I just want half the money back. That's what I would do. And you know me, I go get half the money back, right? And we put it back in the coffers. That's what should be done right now. But I think we should move on but there should be a really learning experience that this can't happen again. But when it comes again, by the way, if they want it to come again, now they know, don't they? They want to send something our way out of the Wuhan lab. They know what we'll do. Shut everything down again? Not me.
Back to the media, then one more from the audience. You're on a tight schedule, right?
That's okay,
You got City Hall to get to. Anyone else over here? Pat?
The war on drugs. Where do you stand on the war on drugs?
I'm against the war on drugs. I'm for the war on drugs. What do you mean? What do you mean? A little more specific.
Well, you know, at this point in time in our nation's history, we've spent billions of dollars on failed drug interdiction. Drug usage rates continue to explode. We've got foreign interference, as you mentioned, in terms of doctored drugs. There are many people who argue that legal drugs are safe drugs, and we could get at the nation's law enforcement community out of the failed interdiction process, because you can argue reasonably that they've accomplished nothing.
I would disagree with that, and let me tell you why. I've always thought, for example, that marijuana should be illegal. I still do. And let me just tell you why, just because we'll take one, can't do every drug, right? One, when we tell people things are legal, we tell kids that it's okay. Colorado became one of the first states to legalize marijuana. By the way, marijuana being 12 times as strong as the stuff in the 1970s were at Woodstock, right? Psychotic breaks among teenagers, lots of real problems, more deaths on the highway, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not really for putting people in jail for smoking dope. But when we say it's illegal and it's a misdemeanor, whatever it is, and we kind of don't let people do it, young people think it's bad. Now, young people in Colorado think it's good. And you have problems in schools that you can't believe that are expounded upon what I just said. You have kids walking in with dime bags from their parents that they got. And they're walking into schools and they're eating candy bars that they get that are full of pot. Do you realize that in Colorado, when you get they make it look like a Snickers bar. But they never, like, if you go get an aspirin at CVS, it says take 2 every 4 hours, don't take more than 8 a day, something like that, right? On the Snickers, whatever they call it, bar, it says nothing. You have people coming into Colorado, sucking down 7 or 8 of them, and totally going whacked out. And the reason it doesn't get reported is that these marijuana companies fund the newspapers, and they fund everything now. So it's a real problem, but I am not for, I'm not, as president, I'm not really gonna get involved in this. I really get involved in like the most major issues, I'm trying to tell you about them, but I've never been in favor of legalizing marijuana. I'm just not. So the war on drugs can continue. It really, though, is important that we have kids who grow up who understand this stuff is really bad. And it destroys your life, especially if you start smoking a lot of pot at a young age. You find that kids never become it. But most parents think it's like, oh, a little weed that I had as a kid. It's not. It's many times more stronger and worse for you, especially for young people.
Kind of a two-part question on the Second Amendment. President Biden made a sweeping anti-Second Amendment statement just in the past week. Our state is going through a lot of regulatory infringements. A, your feelings on the Second Amendment, and B, is there a federal role in that, or like Roe versus Wade, should it be a state's issue?
Well, there's a federal, it's the Second Amendment, so it has to be the federal role. As a gun owner and someone who in my pocket carries a concealed weapon permit, now remember, I grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island, and no one had any guns. Only Mr. de Blasio did, and he was a cop. Ralph's father, cousin anyways, right? So he was the only guy, right? It's a true story, we didn't really think about it. But when I started learning about guns and handling guns back in Memphis, and then taught myself, and then had people really teach me, and went out with police chiefs, retired police chiefs, and I own enough, I'm a big into home defense. I'm a great supporter of the Second Amendment. Remember, I just want to remember this one thing. The reason that everybody should really be trained in handling a gun, and that's why it's too bad that we don't have young people. I wish at 18 I had gone into the military for a couple of years or a year or something, where everybody would have learned all this stuff. You wouldn't have people saying the same crazy things they do today about guns. When you're at a 4-H event in Colorado, and my kids, right over there, Jessica went to the Nationals for shooting shotgun, 22 rifle, archery. She's a second in the county one day in trap shooting. Laffey shoot guns, lots of shots, lots of guns. And we know now, I know now that when handled properly, I feel very comfortable when I'm in Wyoming. I figure everybody around me, including me, is carrying. You don't see bad things happen when everybody's carrying, believe me. When I worked at Memphis, Tennessee, and on the 15th floor, I knew about 25% of the people were concealed carry people, and I didn't have one then, I was too busy. But I felt pretty good, because these guys knew what they were doing. We have to get to a society where people are not scared of this, or trying to, there's more crime in Chicago, and there's the gun law. We could go on all day about this, but I'm a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I think one of the things I'd like to do as president is make sure people are educated, try to get more people involved in things like 4-H, so that they would know at a young age that guns by themselves don't hurt people, that we need to have a population. And the one thing about the Second Amendment, remember this, it was done not so we would have a gun to defend our homes, it was done for a tyrannical government coming in. And there's 350 million guns in this country, and even if the Chinese come in, they got a lot of fighting to do to get through to a lot of people. But in Australia, they don't. They took away those guns. And look at where by the way, in Hong Kong, did they have guns? They had no guns. What happened? They got crushed. So we need everybody in America to learn how to use and to know how to use a gun safely, in my opinion.
Last question. This is not about Donald Trump. This is not about relitigating the last presidential election, but it is about election integrity. In this state, a lot of people concerned about the mass mail balloting, mail drop boxes, early voting. Are you comfortable with the state of election integrity in this country? And is there a federal role in standardizing that?
The last part is a tough one because it belongs to the states about how to do this. But I believe that when I was mayor, and I tell people around the country, Rhode Island had one really good thing going for it. It really had a good voting system. You walked in and voted that day. You had a piece of paper. Someone could challenge. I don't know, that guy Joe, he doesn't live there, right? A Democrat, Republican. But then you voted and you put it in a box that read the vote. But it was a piece of paper not on the internet. It dropped down, it counted the vote. And at the end of the day, state troopers showed up with a Democrat and a Republican, whoever was, and they took them to the same location, put a chain around them with a lock, stayed in the room with people watching. So if we had a rep 2 race, whatever, and it was 3 different boxes, you opened it up and hand counted them. The person that was challenged, if we needed to go find him, really find him, we went and found him and made sure he could vote or not vote. Then we could count or not count the vote if it mattered. That seems to be the way to vote. We all vote on the same day, with a piece of paper, it gets thrown into a box that everybody's watching, right? That's not on the internet. That's the way to vote. It became like we became so lazy. Colorado, there's nothing but mail-in ballots. I get one in the mail, I have to either go drop it off. We don't do anything else. You can go drop it off before or whatever, but we don't do anything else. It's dumb. And you know, there's gonna be an election one day in Colorado, and if you do it here, it's gonna be the same thing, where someone's gonna axe murder somebody and win an election, right? Like, people will have voted, and 3 days before an election, someone's gonna do something so horrific, but he's gonna win. And it should be done the same day with the same information, that's my opinion. And to the way I could be as president, be helpful to that, I would tell these stories about the one thing Rhode Island had going for it. It had, back in 2002, election integrity, in my opinion.
All right, let's hear it for Steve Laffey. As many of you know, Steve, for all of 2022, was my Monday co-host on my In the Dugout program, so he's a family friend, he's a good friend, we wish him luck. And
thank you
we
very
thank you
much.
for joining us.
And thank you all for coming, it's great to see some people. I have to run, so I'd like to hang out with half the people here, but I've got the AFP here with me, tailing me all day, and I've got to get over to about 3 more appointments, but thank you, Mrs. Sten, I love you, Mrs. Sten, thank you for teaching me. I'm glad I didn't kill you with that tree today. And all the other people here, thank you so much, and I better get going.